Hey, y'all. I am really excited to introduce you to today's guest, Sam Reynolds. Sam Reynolds, I first heard speak at the Northwest Astrology Conference in 2020. And I was spending a lot of time studying astrology that year. And his keynote was so profound and affecting to me in that year that I knew that if I was going to study, this is someone I wanted to study with. So I had the great pleasure of taking an intermediate astrology course with Sam that I still, yeah, I literally went back to some of our work 2 weeks ago. Um, and that is not all. um, Sam's story is really extraordinary, what I know of it. And I am so excited to get to hear more. And I don't want to give too much away. Um, is there anything that you want to share before we start?
No, I'm just happy you're doing this, not just because it's me, but you're doing this work. And I think it is good to have more of a public relationship or public conversation about spirituality.
Yeah. So I'll start with you the same place I start with everybody, which is tell me a little bit about your spiritual life in your family of origin. What was that like growing up?
It was rich and complex, maybe even, I'll dare say, complicated. Um, some measure of it is tied up, woven with, Christianity. My family went to Baptist churches, more of the Southern Baptist Convention extraction. You learn that once you get deeper involved, which I'll get to. So I did go to church, and church largely, what I remember before 12 years old, seemed performative, a place for performance, literally. Um,
Mm.
Whether you wanted to sing, my mom was in the choir. Whether you wanted to pray, so I did do my first prayer at my mother finally, because I had been asking to pray, publicly. I was like, let me try it, because there was a prayer before we would go up into the choir stand and sing, and I was part of the choir. And my great grandmother, who I'll talk a little more about because she was instrumental related to my spirituality as well. Um, she, my mom refused me because she's like, he's 8. Why are we gonna let this little boy, pray? What does he know about praying like publicly?
Right.
And my grandmother said, like, next time he wants to, let him, And they were dumbfounded that I seemed to like I had talked to the Lord all the time. And maybe I did, but I don't remember, other than, you know, now I lay me down to sleep. I pray my, whatever that, how that goes. I pray to the Lord
Yeah.
my soul to keep. Um, but there was that part related to my family. Now, my great grandmother was also more complicated because she was religious in the traditional sense, but she also seemed to be hooked into um, the what we would say the mystical Kabbalah, more mysticism, and so she
Hmm.
would work magic, the magic related to the Psalms. There are particular Psalms that you can recite a certain way and inscriptions that you can do with them. Something influenced by something called the 6, 7, 8 books of Moses, which is apocryphal and some say suspicious, and it's more just like an additional sure, I guess not actually a magical text, but she would do work from it
Mm-hmm.
that seemed to work. There are stories
Mm-hmm.
that my family would tell, and so there was this other spiritual side. Now, my father was very different in the sense that he also believed in the message of Christ, but didn't believe in going to church. He thought church was a racket, and he thought church folk were a bunch of hypocrites. I later learned that was very much conditioned by a profound personal experience, um, not even directly related to him, but something that happened with his mother. Basically, when his mother passed away, she had been, or sick, not even before she, it was before she passed away. When she was sick with cancer, she had been a strong donor to her particular church and a staunch supporter of the church. But when she was sick, pastor would even come out and visit her, people from the church, and that stayed with him.
Yeah.
and stayed with him in such a way. He's like, yeah,
Yeah,
go
it's
on.
fascinating to me because that is the second time in 2 days that this kind of energy has come up of like there was this financial sort of rupture, right? That like the church had not even mismanaged resources, but the same way, like had, somebody who had been a longtime donor, but there wasn't that it wasn't even transactional, right?
Right. Yeah.
It was like being
And
totally
so,
abandoned. Yeah.
exactly. And so he would watch televangelists. This largely became important around when I was 12 because I went through a middle age crisis at 12, meaning, so I went to church, like I said, was largely performative. And around the time between 11 and 12, I went through this moment where I became an atheist and then a Christian all in the span of 6 months, and then a minister. And
Right. I mean, that's
how
sometimes
that
like the
happened
atheist part surprises me. Yeah.
is that in seventh grade we learned about evolution, and I was like, wait, what? Oh, this makes all the sense in the world. Yeah, there's no God. I didn't make that public. I didn't say it. I didn't feel the need to have to say anything to anybody, really. But I was like, wow, I think I could get with this. And then I went to camp. I went to a camp for kids with special needs because I had disabilities. That is part of my story because even when I did pray at 8, folks, because of my disabilities and had survived multiple surgeries, at least at that point, 15, 20, they were like, oh, you're going to be a minister. And I was like, yeah, nah, I'm going to be a detective. I'm going to be a criminologist. I don't know what you're talking about. Well, I go to camp, and this one camp counselor, he had these Christian comic books by Jack T. Chick.
Okay.
And Jack T. Chick, for those who are familiar with his comics, This Is Your Life is one of them. I'll talk about that in a second. But he also had his own line of comics featuring a black and white uh, duo. I won't say couple because they weren't a couple who would tour around the country spreading the gospel and getting in different adventures. So it was kind of, and they were very human. It wasn't anything that was sensational, fantastic, other than the appearance of angels or prayer or things related to
Nothing fantastic besides
no,
angels.
angels coming and whatever. But they were regular human beings. And there was this one pamphlet slash comic called This Is Your Life that got to me. And it got to me because when I was 6 years old, I remember, because I think I've always struggled with God and the devil, with the stories of the Bible. I mean, that's some part I've left out. Um, I had trouble understanding what God was. And then I
Mm-hmm.
had even more trouble understanding the devil, which my uh, Bible school teacher, my Sunday school teacher, reminded me of after this seminal moment in 12 that I'll get to. But when I was 6, I believe I had like a vision, and the vision was that God was ultimately a renegade from another universe that came into ours and said, well, I'll make my own. Right now, I
Mm.
later learned that is a very Gnostic idea and not original, but I was just like, oh my God. And I wasn't proud of that. In fact, this is why I'm telling this story. In fact, when I read This Is Your Life, and it goes with this idea that when you die, you're called before the hosts of heaven, and your life and your thoughts are played before the hosts of heaven on Judgment Day. And so when I read that, I got really scared. I was like, so they're going to play that vision I had that God is a renegade and really just like a wannabe from another universe. Oh,
Mm.
that that could spell trouble. I could end up in hell. And it was interesting because I was like,
Right. Then
wait,
they're going to
aren't I an
find out about
atheist?
evolution. Yeah.
Right. And then they're going to say, like, well, you an atheist too, or, you disbelieved. And just this rush of emotion and feeling came in. And I was like, maybe this is the arc of my life. Maybe they were right. Now I was going to be a minister or a Christian. So I did convert. I became a Christian. The call to the ministry, that's a longer story, and I don't want that to take up too much of our whole story, but I did feel a calling while at camp. And then I became, well, later I became this minister. Now, one critical part of the story is that when my mother picked me up from camp, because I didn't write home and tell anyone, because it was actually toward the last week of camp. I mean, knew I was, so it was pointless. So I'll keep the news until I get there. As soon as I get into the car, as she's picking me up, I tell her. She got real quiet, which I was like, is she disapproving? But she said, this is really odd because Granny, the great grandmother I was talking about, who at that point, she takes on the trappings of this sage. I shouldn't say this as hackneyed and stereotype, but she was blind and legless. So in this way, I realized she kind of acquired another kind of mystical sensibility.
Yeah, she fits an
But
archetype.
she does, right?
That's like yeah, you can't argue with
A
that.
trope. So
Wow. Yeah.
my mom says, Granny said to me just before coming to pick you up, go get the preacher. And remember, I hadn't communicated anything to my home.
Hmm.
And I was like, okay, that is bona fide weird. So I told my mom about, what I felt was my calling. And then some things were happening with my current church home, where it turns out that there was some embezzlement matched with some philandering from the pastor.
Hmm.
So I didn't feel like it was good for me to be there. So she found me another church home. She didn't leave that church, actually. Um, but she found me another church home, and I was brought up under the wing of that pastor, Pastor Samuel L.
Hmm.
Williams, and at the New Zion Baptist Missionary Baptist Church. And I gave my first sermon September 28th, 1980, on my mom's birthday.
Wow.
My mom's a double Libra,
I,
um,
I see that.
sun, sun and moon in Libra. So she, and I had gone from the other part was that I was a fighter, a boxer, under my father's tutelage, pretty much from 9 to 12. And I would correct myself now and say that I told my father I was going to get out of the boxing because I didn't feel like it was right to beat people up on Saturday and then preach about love on Sunday.
Hmm.
And he didn't take it seriously. So mom said, write him a letter of resignation. And I did. And then that's when he took it seriously. He's like, okay, I guess.
It's so
I
funny.
would,
That was my next question was going to be like, is there a parallel between those two things?
and
Like, is
now
there?
there's so much I would say to that young boy. And one of the things I was like, you didn't have to leave boxing. You could have made peace with that. Um, but, it was this attempt to be earnest. And
Hmm.
so what I'll say is from 12 pretty much until 19 when I left the ministry, that's a different topic, but until 12 into 19, my spiritual life was centered around the message of Christ preaching and a certain fundamentalist evangelical messaging and intention that my family did not share.
Yeah, that's the
So,
thing that to me is really interesting at that age.
yeah,
It's a
I was
really
completely different than I went hard in the paint, much different than my family.
yeah. And so like to have a completely different I mean effectively to have a different religious life than your family, right? To
Hmm.
take some I mean obviously we're all and also in that period of being a teenager and becoming a separate individual, right? And separating yourself from your family. Usually people do it the other way, Sam, right? Usually
Right.
they
They
rebel
if
against the church and they leave, right? Rather
Yeah,
than doubling
right.
down.
And let me just say this because I've also been um, kind of on this messaging, and I think it's important for me to say as a former minister, child minister specifically. I do not recommend it, and I also do not extol it. I think a lot of people in religious, especially Christian, evangelical Christian life, which is what I know best, it's
Mm,
not as much. I don't think in Judaism, and I don't think it's somewhat of a thing in Islam, but more so as a hafez, as someone who recites scripture, not so much as someone who becomes an imam. I
okay.
don't know about any young imams, but someone who can recite scripture. And this idea in both traditions, we're seeing children as the innocent template and proof of the value of religion, and that if it comes from the mouths of babes, then it's true.
Right.
And I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm not agreeing with it either. But I would say the real issue is the level of responsibility and the level of expectation related to understanding fully the scope of that dedication is
Mm,
far too young. So, for instance, I had adults coming to me, talking to me like, "Well, I'm thinking about divorcing my husband. What do you think about that? What does scripture say?"
whew.
Right?
Yeah.
And I'm fucking 14, and
You're
I'm
like,
like,
I don't.
"You haven't even had a girlfriend yet, really. When was the last time you got laid?" Right? It's and
Mm,
you're gonna counsel this person, this adult, about
right.
divorce.
Right.
And we can also say about that adult, like you're going to see your level of experience and authority to checks notes 14-year-old boy.
Right. Well, but I mean, who is right? But you become a representative, right? You become
I know.
symbolic of the
I,
word and the truth, and yeah, all of the ways that it's like you're not. I certainly was not developed enough at 14 to have that kind of pressure on me, and also for me, knowing what I know about myself now, that would have been so delicious like that. I mean, the right, the Leo rising in me would have been like, oh, they think I know everything. I speak the truth. Um,
and and you can come to believe that. Like I came to believe that. Um there definitely was this sense of privilege on both in terms of, male privilege,
mm,
but there was also this privilege related to feeling like you had something that was rock solid,
yeah,
that was incontrovertible, and not seeing that in many ways it was not. So 19
yeah,
became more the dissolution and disillusionment related to it. Because first it started with there was contention in my church, my new church. I had found another church. And then I didn't feel like I was surprisingly on an arc of development. Like when am I going to get my ordination?
hmm,
And feeling like my pastor, my other church, he kind of had pulled me back from certain duties, which I think now, looking back, that probably was wise,
yeah,
right? But at the time, like my ego was like, "What are you pulling me back for?"
yeah,
And then so initially that was the issue. Then going to college, I was exposed to new thoughts that seemed to contradict what I had learned about the Bible. And so I had a series of questions. And then when I talked to senior ministers, people far older, and would try to bring up some of these issues, what I really got from them was like, "Son, it's a job." And I was like, "Word? Like that's it? Like it's a
whoa,
job?"
yeah,
Like they
yeah,
they some of them would know about some of these contradictions. Like, well, there's this argument that Jesus didn't say these words. That it was from an older source and that there's these discrepancies. Well, what do we do about that? You preach the gospel. It's a
It's
job.
like you don't need to worry about that.
Don't worry
Yeah.
about that. And I was like, let me step away. And that's
Yeah.
what I did at 19. I decided very consciously to step away because I'm like, I didn't want to mislead people and I wasn't sure about what the truth was anymore. So my
Mm.
spiritual life changed and I went back to my default from 12, which ultimately was atheism and more intellectualism, we could say, in the general sense.
Sure.
Um, and so I went to graduate school. And so by the time I discovered astrology, or astrology discovered me, I was back to thinking the only things that were real were race, gender, and class. And
Whoa.
God.
Okay. Sorry, that one just hit me like a track. I'm like, yeah, right. Okay.
So I was like, well, it was only race, gender, and class. And then astrology comes in the mix. And I'm like, what the fuck is this? Like, how does this
Right.
work? So astrology kind of pulled me back more toward the spiritual, especially from 23 years old. And it became the through line, even as I went into other things. I went into theater, more poetry, more literature at that time. So pretty much from, I was even when I dropped out of my PhD program because I also felt an intellectual dissonance in terms
Mm.
of my mentor and the head of the department. And then, because I found another faith actually after that, and it was Black nationalism.
Mm.
So Black nationalism, pretty much from 19 through 23, 24, had become my new gospel.
Hmm.
So you're like, oh, you're a seeker. You're someone who needs to believe in things. Yeah, that probably was true in a way to describe some early aspects of my spiritual life in my
Well,
formative
but
years.
yeah, one of the things that spiritual, formation does for us is it answers questions about like, what is the point of all of this? And what is my role in it? Why am I here?
Right.
And so one of the very first conversations I had on the podcast, one of the things that came through in the course of that conversation was that the notion of being an American citizen has a lot of, right? The like, we have this shared culture, we have these routines and rituals. We believe a mythology. We have this shared mythology that we all clock into or don't. But it really sort of these conversations are really beautiful to me because that keeps blowing my mind. I think over and over
Well, I
again.
mean, yeah, there's something there. I think when we talk about nationalism or any kind of ism
Mm.
ideology, we often don't recognize how reified the idea becomes almost as spiritual principle.
Yeah.
So concepts related to blackness or Africanity, what at the time I would call Afrocentrism, these were all central to the organization of my thought and being for that
Yeah.
time. And astrology came in and challenged that. And I ultimately came to make peace with it, even after 10 years of kicking it in the teeth, and doing charts and
To prove
learning
it
about it
wrong. I mean,
to prove it
I
wrong.
love,
Well,
yeah.
in some measure, that actually was informed by Black studies, African American studies, in the sense, and this is where, yes, I am patting myself on the back. I wasn't a lazy skeptic because I didn't rely on other people's research. And the reason why that's conditioned by African American studies is because when you study the history of science through the prism of oppression, you realize
Hmm.
like people can twist their studies against you. So I
Yes.
didn't trust just other people's studies. I just believed in going toward primary sources. What does astrology say about itself? So I felt like I
Right.
needed to engage astrology books and astrologers on their own terms. And then I still had a respect for mysticism and a respect for the mystical. Because what was odd about that moment is I was friendly to tarot. I was friendly to numerology, but astrology really got under my craw because I was like, how does this fucking work? But the mystical experience that I had is, for whatever reason, after I went to see an astrologer, and that's its own story, and I'm going to keep things condensed because I know you have these other questions and I want to get to them too. Um, when I went to see an astrologer and had a very profound experience, meaning there are things he talked about, specifically one thing about my family dynamic in utero, that I'm like, how do you know that? And specifically, it was that he said something, and it was still vague enough, but still had some specificity to it. He said, there's something that happened between your mother, your brother, a sibling, and your father when you were in utero that complicated your pregnancy. Now, I had only
Mm.
learned that a month before, or 2 months before, with the reading. So I was like, how do you know that? Because I wasn't giving him anything. You
Right.
know,
Oh, of course not. Yeah.
I was like, I didn't want to influence him at all. But I broke and was like, how do you know that? And it was kind of unnerving. And the other course of the reading, in fact, the first 15 minutes I thought was like BS, because he said things like, well, your chart indicates you're a pretty smart fellow. And I was like, in my head,
Uh-huh.
I didn't say this
Yeah.
aloud, but in my head, I said, I told you I was in graduate school. Chances are I'm not an idiot.
Right.
Then he said initially, it's like, there may have been some complications in your birth. You met me. I'm like, I'm fucking 4'9" I was 4.
Right.
Chances
Right. This
are, I
is
mean,
not. Yeah.
this is not rocket science. I mean, like, okay, I hope
Yeah.
you're going to do better. And then that's when he later went into, what happened in utero. Now it gets weirder because I lived in graduate housing at Temple University at the time, and for reasons I still don't remember, I was talking to a white woman. I'll mention that, and it's relevant related to her race to some degree because here I am in African American studies, but I'm talking to this woman, and I didn't really know her, but I start talking to her about visiting the astrologer,
Hmm.
and she says, "Well, I'm into astrology." I'm like, "Oh, cool." And on a lark, I decided to ask her, "When's your birthday?" And she said, "November 22nd. That's my birthday." And I said, "November 22nd, when?" "November 22nd, 1967, same year. We were born the exact same day." And I'm like, "Wow, okay." And my skeptical, you know, quote unquote atheist mind kind of was like shut down for a minute because, like, that's just statistically weird. I don't
Right.
know the actual statistics, but that I would have this astrological encounter and then she's born the same day and then she has these books or she's into astrology. Why am I meeting
Hmm.
this person? Going back to your, questions about why. So I asked her, can I borrow your books? Because I didn't have any books and I didn't know what to. So I did.
Hmm.
The only way to learn astrology, those books from Marion March and Marion Egbers. I'm blanking on the names, but so I read those, and then I got an astrology program when I got my Mac computer. Started doing charts, and I always did the charts for friends and other people I would meet with the complete intention of it unfurling. Like, I was
Right.
learning, and then they even had a report. I was like, does this match you? Yeah. How did you know that? I'm like, wow, okay. And I did that for
Right.
years, off and on, because I told you I went into other things, more spoken word, theater. I did have my only stint at a full time job working for Temple University Press. But at that time, pretty much from when I left graduate school, as I was in the arts, I was lost.
Hmm.
Astrology was the only thread I had related to something we could call spiritual, but everything else was more philosophical, artistic,
Yeah.
which is still
Intellectual. Yeah. I mean, it
intellectual.
feeds
Still,
you.
it feeds
Yeah.
me, but it wasn't related to anything that was on the level of what was like my past.
Sure.
Well, then enter roughly around. Um, I was about to give up on astrology. Um, roughly around between 30 and 33. and I was about to give up on astrology because I couldn't find answers to my questions. I was like, well, why is Saturn in fall in Aries? Why is Mars exalted in Capricorn? What are these signatures? Where do they come from? And I felt like astrology was the regurgitant of pop psychology.
Right. Which, in some ways, astrology at that point really kind of
Well, it
was.
was at the time until I met Robert Zoller at a conference.
Yeah.
I went to a conference because I decided to try to take my studies a little deeper. I was reading more books and trying to, go deeper. And my girlfriend at the time even was trying to encourage me to maybe go into practice. And I was like, that's not a life. Um, and then at the same time as I discovered Robert Zoller, the same girlfriend, took me to my first Kabbalah meeting.
Hmm.
And so I got involved with this Kabbalah group where I stayed for 18 years. And
Wow.
from the Toledano tradition, um, Zev Shimon ben Halevi, or Zev ben Shimon Halevi,
Yeah.
um, Warren Kenton, his school of thought, the Toledano school, um, and I was involved with that. And she dropped out, I think, even after the first few meetings, but I stayed in it for, like I said, 18 years, meeting with this group of
Yeah, that's a
people.
long time.
And so astrology kind of softened my way into exploring a different spiritual tradition. But as far as discovering this other form of astrology, which I came to identify as traditional, thanks to Robert Zoller, it kind of restored my faith in astrology because it's like, oh, and that's when I discovered the Thema Mundi and
Right.
all these other ways in which we can understand the classical models and thoughts of
Yeah, and
astrology.
there's something about that, like how systematic traditional astrology is, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever we want, Hellenistic, classical, all of the um, that really feeds my, like, both my spiritual and intellectual side.
Yes,
Right?
I
It's like
agree.
it really marries the two.
So that's and then so that's just to give
Mm,
a timeline. That's 33. You know, 10th house perfection year from ascendant, and
yeah.
um and then after my Saturn return had settled, and so I stayed with that group pretty much until I just left New York, which I left when I was 51. But I still felt like something was missing, and I had softened from the hardcore aspect of my anger, which turns out that was the truth of it. My anger with God and Christianity. And I think that around 40, 41 is maybe when I felt like maybe I can return to the church.
Hmm.
And then I saw Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ, and
Okay.
which, you know, honestly, I know Mel Gibson is not the favorite person, right? For things he's
For
done
all sorts of reasons.
for
Yeah.
all sorts of reasons. But I still think that film was damn good, right? And what was damn good about it is literally he emphasized the suffering of Christ, you
Yeah.
know, which really was brutal. But and I mean no offense to any Christians related to their faith, um, and the message of Christ. But for me, when I saw that film, I I didn't believe in the messianic story anymore. I was like,
Hmm.
that's not what I'm seeing or what I feel. I don't feel any kinship to this at all.
Yeah.
So I was like, I can't return because I don't believe.
Yeah.
It didn't call back to me that Jesus wasn't the
Yeah.
messianic figure he had been in my childhood.
Yeah.
So, you know, I free floated with Kabbalah, whatever. Um, Long story short, to shorten the story, then I discovered Islam. When I say I discovered Islam, not because I was looking for dogma. For those who know astrology, you'll get what I'm saying. I was enduring Neptune square to my sun at the time.
Uh-huh. Yes.
So I was drinking heavily. I wasn't a drunk and I wasn't alcoholic. Not that there's shame in that, but I was drinking heavily. I just was untethered. And I was like, I need to find a tether because I had also gone through a bad breakup, that kind of wrecked me. Not blaming her, but that's kind of what I was experiencing. Anyway, I was like, I need to, maybe hitting the ground 5 times a day might be a good thing for me. And
Hmm.
that's pretty much why I became a Muslim. Although I also liked the call to prayer. I liked that it was anti imperialist in the sense of the Western imperialism, its
Right.
history related to that as a challenge to that. It has its own imperial notions. It has its own sordid history.
Sure.
But that's when I converted to Islam, and that was at 45.
Yeah, and
Um,
this is part of the reason that I wanted to talk to you is like that transition has been something that always fascinated me.
yeah,
And I'm
my
curious.
transition or the transition that people make,
No, no,
or
your transition into converting to Islam, right? Like as
mm-hmm,
a and what little I know about Islam is certainly in the United States the connection to the Black nationalist movement, right?
mm-hmm.
That's there's something there. Um, does that feel like that was one of the threads,
It
or was it
was,
less
it
relevant?
was in the sense that I knew about the Nation of Islam. I knew that the Islamic tradition and the Islamic tradition included black folk,
Yeah,
included folks in Africa. Um, even it was known, even if you just look at roots, Kunta Kinte was a Muslim, whether he was a real person or not, that's debatable.
yeah,
Um, but there are people who were from Western Africa who were Muslim,
yeah.
and so that they came here Muslim, and that there still was some measure of that. And even with the Nation of Islam, seeing that as a reclamation related to that history was still important.
Yeah.
So for me, it was a kind of reclamation having its ties as a challenge to white imperialism and having its challenge related to, yeah, what happened to my ancestors. Even though, yes, Islam does have its own history, sordid history of enslavement, um, but it 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 also had what I felt was its beauty. And what sealed the deal for me was something other than like wanting to hit the ground 5 times a day. What what really sealed the deal was this one particular brother who said he was a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, but he didn't make that a big claim. It wasn't like he was trying to sell me anything, or he was. I met him at work, so he wasn't like trying to do anything. But he said something beautiful. He said the duty of every Muslim, or the work of every Muslim, is to really make the words of the Prophet come alive in their own bodies.
Mm,
And I was like, oh, that's beautiful. It- to have the poetry of the Quran come alive
yeah.
in in one's living, because I wasn't looking for a dogma. One
Yeah.
thing that's different, that was different, um, from my past, being fundamentalist. I believe I had successfully extracted myself from fundamentalism. Now, I did do something very conscious my first year as a Muslim. I suspended my disbelief because that was some measure of inhibition to learning things.
Yeah.
So I was like, and I had brief run-ins with that. You're like, well, what kind of run-ins? Just to kind of give an anecdote, I remember being at the mosque, and this brother said, Adam and Eve, who I still took, and who I took and I still take as mythic characters.
Yeah.
He said they first spoke Arabic, and without thinking, I said to him, "That's not likely. I would. That's not likely because
Yeah.
probably the outgrowth of Arabic is as a Phoenician. And I just went into this etymology, this
Right.
historical etymology. Is like, no, that's not what the Quran says. And I was like, okay. And
Mm.
I just stopped debating him. But then my imam, who was like he was a wise man. He passed not too long, maybe 4 years into me being a Muslim, if that long. Let me think. Maybe it wasn't even that long, but close to it. He had Lou Gehrig's disease. He said to me, "You can't talk about everything with everybody at the mosque about these things. You're right. You were right, but you can't do that." And I was like, "Oh." And so that was like my wake up call. Like, let me just
Hmm.
chill, say no to nothing, and see where I land a year later. Like I committed literally to a year. And at that year, at the end of the year, I'm like, I don't believe this. I don't believe that. That
Mm-hmm.
works. That's useful. That, no. So it just became more for me. You're like, oh, you're cherry picking. Okay, yeah, okay, I cherry picked. Sue me. But I think it was more, I had to follow my heart and follow what made sense and what was useful to me. And what was useful is the practice. And that's why we're here, why I
Yeah.
also wanted to come on your show and talk to you that the practice, your spiritual practice, is something that can be and often is distinct from dogma.
Sure. I think in many ways it has to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it's why it's so hard for us to wrap our fingers around it
Mm-hmm.
because at its very nature, like I think spiritual belief, spiritual practice, spiritual life denies certainty.
I missed some of what you said, Vera.
It says that it like how about now? Can you hear me now?
We broke up a little bit. I don't know if it's on
Okay,
my
hold on.
end.
No, 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 no. It's okay. Hold on. Let me do. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go on. Sorry.
Okay, good. No, you're fine. I just want to make sure that we're good.
What were you saying?
So, the thing about spiritual life and practice, it seems to me, is that it resists certainty, right?
Yes.
Sort of by its very nature. And so, I hear you say cherry picking, and the yes, that's true. And also, what's true about it is that it becomes a deeply personal relationship, right? And that's where, right, it becomes individual, it becomes unique.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
so
that's what I
yeah,
learned from my first foray into religion. It's like it was not personal. I was attempting to hold to dogma as a way of trying to hold to certainty, and none of it was certain.
yeah,
And this is kind of an important thing I think about, especially related to the Abrahamic tradition, is I think a lot about the true nature of faith. And the true nature of faith is being willing to live with that uncertainty. And I go back to, you know, the key figure in the Abrahamic traditions, which is Abraham,
yeah,
or Ibrahim from the Islamic tradition, or Avram from the Jewish tradition.
right.
And the reason why I think about him is he was a person who genuinely lived by faith because he came from a whole different set of people with a whole different set of beliefs, largely drawn by astrology, largely
Mm-hmm.
by this idea of polytheism, but he felt this calling toward this particular unknown God and largely lived with that aspect of faith, even to the point, and we can be critical of it or not, even to this point of faith where this entity, this God, says, like, give me your firstborn son. Now, what was fascinating for me, having come from my tradition, in the
Mm,
Christian tradition, it was Isaac.
right.
In the Islamic tradition, it's Ismail, it's Ishmael, in terms of
Mm.
who was going to be sacrificed. So there's a whole feast day or feast, um, an
Huh.
Eid, as it's called, that
Yeah.
centered more around, you know, the other son, Ismail. So that was interesting to me, as a dynamic of faith. And
Right. This is
you might
like the
ask me,
whole.
like, which one has the story, right? I don't know. Abraham's dead, so are all his immediate children, if he ever lived. Okay, and I know that sounds heretical, but again, I didn't live for the dogma. I wasn't looking
Right.
at it as historical fact. Um, it has mythic significance, which
Yeah.
means then it becomes the story that we feel hooked into. I had
Yeah.
learned that, from my last, foray in my first marriage. No, I mean from my first foray.
From my childhood priesthood.
Right.
Right. Like.
That's something I had already dealt with. So I wasn't looking for another or anything to replace it.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. So what today? What does your spiritual life look like?
So I'm gonna come out. I
Uh-oh.
have I haven't been out, but I'm gonna come out. Even though I'm dressed this way, and I'm dressed for a different way. I'm dressed for a different reason today. I can definitely share with your listeners, and I know it's going to be public. I'm not a practicing Muslim anymore.
Huh.
I'm not in practice, which is very different than my departure from Christianity. I
Yeah.
leave, if I could say it that way, with no anger, any animosity. Just don't feel the need to be along that route anymore.
Hmm.
So I don't get people are asking, are you praying 5 times a day? No. Did you celebrate, the Eids, the
Right.
Ramadan and nope. You
Hmm.
know, I celebrate it as I do many holidays.
Right.
Um, you know, when I say something on Twitter or whatever, but I am not in practice anymore. And again, like, well, did you lose faith or no? Not in the sense that we could talk about losing faith when I was a Christian. I've changed. I
Yeah.
think it served a very necessary purpose. I can explain it astrologically. I came to Islam during the square to my son. I left, we could say in quotes, left Islam at the
In the
trine.
opposition. Oh, at the
No, the
trine. Okay.
trine of my to my son, 29 degrees Pisces.
Yeah.
So,
Huh.
um, it's almost as if like something else has come in. So you're like, well, what's your practice now? I think that's still in taking shape. I'm
Yeah.
dressed this way with this particular talisman that I got from Christopher Warnock, honoring Jupiter. Like, oh, you're worshiping foreign gods, or you're not dealing with the
Well, I could
one.
just go like, right, it's Thursday, right?
It
That
is
sounds right.
Thursday.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
Thursday.
so and I'm gonna put something on the grill, some lamb chops, because that's sacred to Jupiter, and eat that and
Huh.
save some for the ancestors, for at least an ancestor.
Yeah.
And it becomes, you're like, well, did this God, Jupiter lead you away? It's not like I'm worshiping Jupiter as much as what Jupiter manifests. And we could say Jupiter is another aspect of Allah.
Right.
In fact, when we have these 99 names of Allah, not that we're worshiping any of these names as only Allah, but as manifestations of the mystery. And I've kind of
Yeah.
come back full circle. When I say full circle, I think my default is more towards humanism. And in terms of my spiritual practice, celebrating the human struggle rather than just being completely enamored with the divine or honoring the
Hmm.
divine through the human struggle.
Yeah.
Um, I'm rooting for us. So that brings me back to, because something I observed about myself in all aspects of my journey, one thing I have never let go, and if you're going to ask me about my practice, is ancestral veneration. I've always
Uh-huh.
believed in my ancestors, whether I'm talking about my immediate ancestors
Yeah. Or
or
yeah.
the larger sense of ancestors, which now includes astrological ancestors, Abu Mushar, or you
Hmm.
know Saul and Bisher or, you know, yeah, even William Lilly. You know, they don't have to be right
It's funny. Yeah, it's funny to think about that as like I would think about that as lineage, but
lineage,
it's
but in
really
some ways,
like there's something about like connecting to that as like thinking about ancestors as those being who went before us, who set the table for us and want only the best.
yeah, Michael Luton is an ancestor now who I knew,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And you know, Robert Zoller, you know,
yeah,
Robert Schmidt. So there are ways in which to honor them.
yeah,
And so like I do light candles. When I remember their birthdays or more immediate family members, my sister, my brother, my mother, my father. Um, but on the other aspect of a spiritual practice is that pretty much every day on Facebook, when I get notifications or I know somebody's birthday, I will be sure to give them a birthday message. You're like, how's that the spiritual practice? Because I am celebrating someone's life. I love
mm.
birthdays because it's honoring how they came into the world. Now, yeah, of course you love birthdays. You're an astrologer. Yes, that's true. That's also true. But by virtue of studying astrology these
Or
30
the other
plus
way
years,
around,
right,
right?
these
You're an
30 plus,
astrologer because you love birthdays.
right, these 30 plus years have taught me how important birthdays are
Yeah,
because it's not only a way to remember those who are gone, but also a way to remember those who are here and for them to remember that they are here and that they're here for a purpose. You know,
yeah.
even, and people like used to ask, you know, like, what's in line for me this year? I'm like, I don't fucking know. I'm just saying happy birthday. I'm not looking at your solar return. You
Right,
know, I have to get a little caustic a little bit. I'm like, yeah, I mean, like, can I just wish you a happy birthday and, you know, Fred,
right.
and let that be it? You know, do I have to feel like I have to do something? You know,
Hmm.
but that is a spiritual practice. What else? Um, you know, experiment, reading, learning, I think is a spiritual practice. Better trying to understand the world rather than just thinking it's all contained in spiritual books or books related to spirituality.
Yeah.
It's how to live in the world. And especially through the humanist lens. You're like, well, what's the humanist lens? Do you mean the humanistic? No, I don't. I mean, when I say humanist, and it is distinct from how atheists will approach things. You can be an
Hmm.
atheist humanist, absolutely. But my problem with atheism, having been one, had various turns with it, is it. I think it takes an immense more faith to be an atheist than it takes to be a theist. Because what you're saying is, you know, there is no God. Whereas a wise theist would say, like, I know there's something, and I
Yeah,
might call it this, but truthfully, it's something else. I mean, it's broader than that.
yeah,
Any
yeah.
good
It's
Muslim, for instance, would tell you, having studied Islam for a number of years, like if I were to ask a Muslim, a tutored Muslim, a well known or well studied Muslim, is Allah God's name? They would have to tell you that's one of God's names, but God doesn't have a formal name. Because Allah
right,
means just the God. It doesn't mean that's God's name. Because
right,
Christians, Arabic Christians, or Christians who speak Arabic, also will say Allah.
right.
So it's not like it's singularly just God. It is something that is on some level beyond description. And I
Right,
think,
right. It's a symbol, right?
right,
It's pointing to a thing that is
right.
bigger
It's bigger,
than the symbol itself. Yeah.
right. You know, it's the finger pointing at the moon, but not to be confused with the moon, as the
Yeah.
Buddha says.
Yeah.
So I think that's where I've come back to. Um, Embracing the mystery rather than being thralled or, I guess, adjacent to the dogma.
Yeah. And to me the dogma is the place we have to set the dogma aside to have a deep spiritual life.
Hmm.
And it's why it's so uncomfortable. You know, I'm with you. Like I think faith doesn't exist without doubt, you know, and so like I hear you say like talk about atheists, it's like, oh, absolutely. Like when I was an atheist, I had no doubt that there was no God. Right? I was
Right.
like, I don't know what I don't I wish I had this like this, friendly sky daddy, as I've said with other people. That must be so nice for you. It must be so nice for you to believe that there is, a purpose for your life, something bigger than you.
But I do want to say something else. On the
Yes.
other side of that, without dogma, so we can be free of dogma. But then I'm examining this, even applying it to myself right now. The the other extreme of that isn't necessarily atheism. It's those folks who say like, "Well, I'm spiritual, not religious." And the
Uh,
problem with that I have is
uh-huh.
like, okay, then it brings up a question. What holds you accountable other than just your notion of spirit? Because one thing that the religious will have, even though they may not abide by it, right? Um, but they will have is either a set of principles, we could even say laws, by which they're expected to follow. So as a Muslim, it's like, you know, if I went to your house and you're like, Sam, I got ribs. Are they beef ribs? Nah. Okay, hold on, I'll take one. You'll be like, okay, so he really ain't practicing. He's
Mm-hmm.
gonna chow down on this pork right now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now you either could say something or not, whether that would be your business or not. But we both would know, like, okay, that's that's not what Muslims are supposed to do.
Right.
Or like if I got sloshed or smashed drinking, like, also that's not you're not supposed to be drinking. Now you might say like, okay, when you're spiritual, not religious, what what becomes a foundation? And I think this is even one of your questions. What becomes the foundations for how you deal with your people? Because some of the most selfish, self-righteous, and self-absorbed people I've met are the ones who will say, I am spiritual, not religious.
Yes. Yes, because
Who
and
could
I
say like you're poor or you're struggling because you're not evolved, or this is the life you chose.
right.
And I'm like,
Right. Or yeah, in what world? Yeah, exactly. You manifested it. I'm like, whoa, whoa, back up. What's interesting, I don't think I've ever thought about it like this, Sam, but I think that's why, the two questions are what is a spiritual principle? Because I don't think you can have a rich spiritual life without having some, clear principle, right? It's like, and it's like a principle is a guideline that we live by. It's a way that we measure ourselves.
well, I see. This is why I like to say, what I remember about being a humanist,
Mm,
because it does emphasize how you deal with the people around you. Because you can have people like, well, I'm on my evolutionary path. Or even when I was a Christian, and this used to piss me off and have debates with my mom about it. I'm seeking my soul salvation. I'm like, that's it. That, you,
right.
so that is just it's just for you,
So it's just you. It's just for
right?
you. Yeah.
And I think because people will say like, well, and I've seen this also from astrologers. Astrologers will say like, well, astrology has nothing to do with race or color. It doesn't. And I'm like, so you think it's an accident that we only get quote unquote two female archetypes related to the planets, Moon and Venus. Well,
Hmm.
Mercury sometimes switches. Oh, that's thank you. That's such a relief, right? But
Right.
all the other motherfuckers, the other seven of them are masculine. This is
Hmm.
justice, right?
Hmm.
It it Astrology is still an articulation of our our terrestrial dynamic,
Yeah.
our patriarchy, all these other things that happen. So to try to divorce ourselves completely from this, as a matter of, well, transcendence or
Right.
evolution,
Right.
I think misses the mark. Principles still can be related to how we engage our sense of humanity.
Mm. Yeah.
I think they have to. Whether you talk about, from whatever level you want to talk about it, whether
Right.
it's toward compassion or whether you're like, like, well, I'm from the religion of Lucifer. I mean, I won't even put that on Lucifer, but I'm from this other kind of religion that like we just look out for yourself. Okay, at least we're clear on your principle.
Right.
But I think I don't know if that's a sustainable principle. I mean, evolutionary psychologists and scientists have found that part of our evolution has been mutuality. And it hasn't been necessary. Someone tried to define it really recently as kindness. It is not always kindness, but
No.
it is a mutuality of looking after others as a
Yeah.
way of looking for yourself. So I think
Yeah.
that goes
Yeah.
even to the golden rule.
Yeah. An acknowledgement that we can't. We
We're
were
not
not
in
built to
alone.
live alone. Yeah.
Yeah,
We
we're
were
not
not.
in
We were not
alone. So
designed. We were not.
yeah, so that's kind of more to answer that question about principle, and then related to spirituality. What I think that does involve a sense of community. It doesn't have to be a religion,
Yeah.
So you might say, well, what's yours now, Sam? Well, it's still some measure of stoicism,
Hmm.
and stoic thought, um, in realizing that we are responsible for our emotions and engaging our emotions, and as social beings, how we deal with each other, and dealing with the cosmos, um, not just in the terms of the broad sense, but the cosmos that also deals within the civic sensibility and responsibility. So that's what keeps
Yeah.
me voting. That's what keeps me socially active and alert. That is something that's clearly articulated by Marcus Aurelius in Meditations, and also from Seneca,
Yeah.
two seminal um, Stoic thinkers. Um, and then, yeah, I take the messages of Jesus, the messages of Muhammad, still with me. They're not like oh, I've thrown them out with the trash. I couldn't relate
Mm-mm.
to Jesus as Messiah, but as prophet, as teacher,
Yeah.
clearly I do.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting to hear the thing about being responsible and tending to the community is, I'll just say like faith without acts is dead, right? Like I have
Mm-hmm.
seen your generosity and your ongoing commitment to lifting up people who don't have opportunity, right? Who don't have like
Mm-hmm.
continuing to in a way that you never had to. I mean, like let's be honest, like I don't know. Every time I am around a black leader who is doing hard work inside of communities that are primarily white, I'm just like, you are like, you didn't have to do that, But the way that you have continued to lovingly encourage and open up the doors for people has been, yeah, it's a way of like teaching in your actions, right? Like setting a standard for other people, not just not just preaching it, right? But living it.
Living it. I mean, that's also a development in terms of my work, right? I went from preaching it and not knowing how to live it as a
Right.
teenager to now living it and preaching some of it. I'm not trying to tell people what to do, but more so how to be alert. And
Yeah.
astrology is a good tool related to that, but it's not the only tool that we have at our discretion. And I think a lot of astrologers forget that. Um, they can get so much into the astrology and wonder of astrology that they forget. I had an astrologer recently who will remain nameless. Um, they had as a post, as they were, you know, somewhere overseas, under a waterfall, that they were talking about the Grand Water Trine that happened recently. And they were
Mm.
like, between what's happening, in the Caribbeans and then us at a waterfall, the power of this Grand Water Trine. And I wrote them privately. And I said, I was going to say something snarky on your page, but I decided not to, and tell
Mm-hmm.
you that this is in poor taste. People are fighting.
That is a kind way to put it,
I
Sam.
know, my Libra mom would be damn proud, right?
For real.
Right? I know she is. So I was like, that is in poor taste There are people who are struggling for their lives right now while you are under a waterfall somewhere. I don't think those two should go together like that.
No.
And they heard me and they changed it. And they said,
Good.
with a prayer. So yeah, it worked out well. Um,
Yeah.
and I'm very proud of them, in terms of doing that. Because they could have been like, oh, fuck off, Reynolds. Um,
Right? Well, but I mean, this is to go back to your question about like what, without religious dogma, what holds us accountable,
mhm.
And I think for me, part of the answer to that is that loving community, and not like loving you can do whatever you want, but like I care about you enough to say that is in poor taste,
Mhm.
and I trust your experience, I trust your perspective, and I trust your best wishes for me, right? That it's not coming as an attack, but that it is coming as an act of like fierce care, we might say.
Yeah. And but where I felt some measure of growth is that I I think I would have just gone with going on their page, um, and being like, yo, blah blah blah. But I was like, is that really building trust, intimacy, and community? And this goes to something that I've
Mm,
been keenly aware of since 2022. Because I used to very much actively, and I think you followed me on Twitter or we were connected. I used to be very active in the calling out community and
mm-hmm.
more related to, you know, yeah, the calling out community. But I realized that there's more of an opportunity to call folks in. And this moment that people kind of embraced pretty much from the early days of Twitter until now, will you feel the need to kind of have to shame someone publicly rather than trying to have a conversation about this. And I
Yeah.
think that needs to happen more, not just in the astrological community, but a lot of different communities, including, especially among men. You know, and I say that you're like, well, why are you singling out men? Because we're fucking up. I think in many ways, um, we are a large part of the problem. Like, well, why are we a large part of the problem? The stats tell one story. We're not
Yeah.
we're not thriving in a lot of the areas that we could thrive, whether we're talking about in terms of education, in terms of the workforce,
Yeah.
in terms of marriage,
Yeah.
relationship, all these particular markers we can use, and also in terms of
Health.
income
Yeah.
and health.
Yeah.
Whereas women are doing better. They're not where they can be, should be, but they're doing better and achieving a lot more. I mean, this is a generation of women that's unprecedented, worldwide generation of women,
Mm,
unprecedented in human history,
yeah.
around the world in terms of their levels of achievement, politically, financial stability, independence. You want to name it, in aspects of leadership, not all ways of it. You're like, well, is that a threat to men? Many men perceive it as,
Right.
and so they're not coping well. You know, however
Well,
people
what's
want to
hard
believe.
about it
Yeah.
is, it's like like I live this. What it is a threat to is the way things have been. It's a threat to our social order, you know,
Yeah.
that like I'm a 45-year-old woman, single and childless who lives alone. No one has shunned me or called me a spinster ever. It's like a completely normal, my life is normal in a way that has never been, right? But it's like it is I am in many ways the first generation where that was, yeah, nobody's judging me, even living in the South, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so reckoning with where all of us sit now, right? What does that mean? How do I relate to other people? How do I relate to the wider social order? I
Yeah.
think is a question that all of us are asking right now. And so, yeah,
A
the way that
question,
affects men is real.
and I think we may need to engender more conversations. Um,
No pun
but
intended.
right, but I think many men are not mature enough. And I think some women are not, especially
Right.
online. We cannot have this conversation. It just gets,
No.
it just gets so vicious,
Yeah.
um, very quickly, um, on both sides that I've seen and experienced. Like, I don't talk about gender issues publicly anymore. Well,
Yeah.
online. I plan to talk about them at UAC, but specifically to
Good.
men. Yeah, to men. It's not only for men. I hope many women come, but it is to talk about. I'm looking at the mythic aspect of trauma between Saturn. Well, we could say between Uranus, Saturn, Jupiter, and Neptune, as reflected in the sky.
Mm.
Right? Because mythically, there's definitely a thread of
Yeah.
of trauma there that
Yeah.
wasn't dealt with, and we could talk about what that might mean to the aspect of masculinity that
Yeah.
we aren't having. Um, and what I've had to piece together
Mm.
on my own, like you made an astute point that I didn't fill in the blank. Like, oh, you did the opposite that many people do. They actually are breaking away with open rebellion with fundamentalist or evangelical Christian parents. You were the evangelical. Well, the part I left out, my father did not go to church, but my father, who I shared Jupiter with, was a
Mm-hmm.
criminal. And so some measure of maybe my open rebellion came out in two very specific ways. One, what did I say? I wanted to be a criminologist,
Yeah.
which, I never
While
forget.
he's while he's training you in boxing. I mean, he was like,
Yeah,
"I'm going to give you a skill that you are going to need to have."
right. Yeah, and he saved my life. I mean, that's a different conversation, but he saved my life with that because it gave me the boxing because I was fighting a lot. The reason why he decided to put me in the ring, I was getting into fights. I was very angry young man, um, picked on, and so either I would have a battle with words, which I knew I could
Which
win,
you are
or
so skilled at. I mean, it's the thing
thank you,
you have a surgical way with words.
thank you. So I was like, I knew I could win with that, or I would fight. And he was like, "This is not going to go well for you." And so he took the kid, despite my mom's protestations, with the multiple surgeries and the birth defects. He decided, I'm gonna put you in the ring. And my mom was like, "You can't do that. He's
Right.
got all these
She
problems."
had all
Like,
the reasons why you couldn't. Absolutely.
and where I give him kudos, he didn't listen to her. He's like, "No, he's going to the ring." And and in fact, I'll never forget his first lesson. I know I went on a tangent, but I'll come back. Um, his first lesson to me is that he had an older boy who was from the neighborhood that he was training. And when I say older boy, because I first went in the ring when I was 9, so this boy
Mm-hmm.
had to have been 15, and and he was pretty fit. He was taller. Now we were head guards, so
Yeah.
it wasn't brutal, but he gave him the instruction. The boy, he said, just keep punching him in the face, talking about me. He said, just punch him in the face. And so I get in the ring, and boy's just, jabbing the way that my father had taught him to jab, and he kept punching me in the face, and I'm throwing haymakers and, head cocking back and blah, blah, blah. And he just keep punching him in the face. And it didn't last long. It may have been a minute or two before I was like too tired.
Yeah.
And dad came up to me and he said, how you feeling? Angry, pissed off. Because basically I'm like pissed off at him, pissed off at that, I
Yeah.
didn't even get a punch in. He's like, what else you feel? Tired? He said, good. This is what I thought you feel because I'm going to teach you how not to feel like that. So that you learn
Mm.
not to get in that situation. And I was like, but I got it. I was like, okay.
Right.
It was a clear demonstration that skill will beat this anger.
Yeah.
And so He took me under his wing and taught me. And I have to say, under his tutelage, I did become quite skilled. In fact, I don't know if you know anything about boxing. He was left-handed.
Hmm.
So one of the things he did that he saw flexibility with my mind, he's like, "Oh, you can switch." So I actually could go from right-handed to
To
southpaw.
left-handed. Okay. Yeah.
I could do it even mid-fight, which is fucking confusing and dangerous. Not for
Yes.
me,
Yo, for
but
the, yeah,
for the
100%.
opponent, because it's like,
Because
and
he's
then I
built a
just
whole
boom,
defense based on you being,
and
yeah.
then I just switch up. So on his level, I was like, yo, that was brilliant. I don't know how he did it, but he did it, and I could switch.
Yeah.
I still can switch. Going back to his life as a criminal, I mean, he was very good as a criminal too. Um, he got out of that life interestingly at our Jupiter return. So when I went into the ministry at 12, he got out
Mm.
of crime.
Hmm.
Almost like we both had a similar wake up. And he had a reason to get out. My mom partly, and then more of the police were getting onto him. And you're
Yeah.
like, well, what did he do? Numbers. He was a bank for the numbers. So it wasn't
Hmm.
drugs, still crime. We did it. We had a good life. I mean, that was a big turning point. You know, I, we were petty rich, right? We had up until I was 12, I could get whatever I wanted.
Mm.
But I'm actually grateful because it's interesting. I went into the ministry life of service because that became a turning point
Hmm.
in my character. Because up until then, notice what I said, I could get whatever I wanted. I was a brat, right? And so I think it helped condition a different mindset that
Yeah.
even made the ministry better for me.
I mean, it
Even
really,
though
it's,
I don't, just to be clear, I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think it's a good idea for children to go into the ministry, but that was its own thing.
but it's interesting for me, and I think we all do this, right? That like life can only be understood backwards, but must be lived forward. Like I
Hmm.
can, everything that you've told me, it's like seeing sort of the hand of spirit guiding you all the places that you needed to be at the moment you needed to be there, right? And maybe that's a choice that I make to create meaning in a world that is chaotic.
Hmm.
But yeah, it seems really I'm fascinated by that. I interrupted you. You were talking about your dad, but also as it related to this sort of the mythic aspects of trauma. And I
Hmm.
wasn't sure if there was something you wanted to tie up there.
Just the fact that um, I become a lot more conscious and aware of how we need healing in certain ways. I mean, it's good to get the individual healing that happens through a session, but in terms of understanding, how we operate at different life stages,
Yeah,
and what's tasked and asked of us at those life stages,
yeah,
those moments could be so helpful. Um, I mentioned my father and I were both at our respective Jupiter returns. What is expected of us at those Jupiter returns? Like for me, in my first Jupiter return, I had to deal with. I should have been cultivating a lot more wonder rather than just certainty. Um,
mm,
my father was looking at like his his life stage development at 47, 48, and having to reconstitute his life,
right,
rather than just relying on what he had been doing because it wasn't going to be sustainable.
right.
And so that is not unusual. It can happen roughly between 45 and 47.
Yeah,
Um, and maybe he didn't heed earlier warnings, but he heeded, what came from my mother ultimately, which is like,
yeah,
yo, you better straighten up or I'm leaving because I'm not
yeah.
dealing with you in prison again. And he had been in prison not during my lifetime, but my brother's lifetime, which affected us. My brother's life trajectory was very different than mine.
Was that the what happened when you
No,
were in
well,
utero? That
when
was
we were
something else.
in utero, what was interesting, no, that was, he was in prison during the first 5 years of my brother's life. So
Ooh,
what I think affected their relationship is that when he returned, I think my brother was like, "Who the
who
fuck
are
is
you?
this?" Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I don't think that ever their relationship ever fully stabilized
Yeah.
for either one of them.
Yeah.
Where it was always clear with me. I mean, one of the things, the in utero thing, I can get into, either another time or can say
Yeah.
quickly. But what 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 was fascinating for me is that I spent my father died roughly. Oh God, I always kind of blank on this. So he died when I was 35, going on 36, at my
Right.
third
That
Jupiter
next
return.
Jupiter return, right?
Right, at my
Yeah.
third Jupiter return. And I spent, it wasn't probably until 34, his last year of life, had spent 34 years believing that my older brother was the favorite son because he was able bodied, he was closer, he looked like my father. I was like, he's the favorite son. Until I watched their interactions. Like, I'm grown, I'm older, and I was there to, help take care of dad. But I watched their interactions. My father was abusive to my brother.
Mm.
Um, stupid ass boy, blah blah blah. He would say things like that,
Yeah.
and it hit me. I was like, holy shit, he's not the favorite son. I am, and I didn't. It wasn't any kind of joy or relief. It was like, it actually was, some measure of, I don't know if it was dread or horror, but it was kind of like, one, stupid me. Two, I was like, damn, like, but why? Like,
Yeah.
he's the one who's here with you, my brother, my older brother. He's the one
Yeah.
who's been loyal and most consistent. Why does he get your vitriol and I don't?
Right.
Right? And I think some measure of it goes back to their dynamic,
Yeah.
that never got healed or addressed. Um, and yeah, it also complicated my relationship with my brother. Um,
Yeah.
and so he's gone now. So he died at 59, at the brink
Wow.
of his
Right.
his fifth Jupiter return.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of, so it got me into, studying more about these different cycles and
Yeah.
what's asked of us more in the worldly sense. And my humanist perspective keeps me grounded, so I don't get into words. And again, this is not a critique, or maybe it is. And if it is, you'll live. Not you, but people who are listening.
Yeah.
Um, you know, People start talking about your karma, or in this life is versus your last life, or your spiritual
Yeah.
development. I I want to know how to live more in the world, to be able to have a more fulfilled sense of purpose,
Yeah.
and more, what I could say, is a, how did I put it in one of my, so I'm from my book, forgive me, I'm just going to say what I realized.
Please.
It's more to be able to have, an interpersonal achievement in public and private, realizing that our achievements are never just for us and never just singularly personal.
Yeah.
They're also, for our ancestors, for others, our families, those we care about. You mentioned in terms of, for other people of color, like for me,
Sure.
it's, and not even just people of color. It's also people who are not like me. I'm not queer,
Yeah.
right? I will say that I'm not queer. That doesn't mean anything, but I realize queer people are also ostracized from particular spaces.
Yeah.
Especially, we need to make more scope in the astrology community for non-binary folks, for trans
Yeah.
folks.
Yeah.
So, yeah, sorry.
No, I would say like, but I also like, right. I am effectively a cishet white lady. Um, Astrology is made for me in at least in our modern terms, right? But having that, like, I think that that kind of service is in benefit for all of us, right? I agree in terms of like how people are directly impacted, right? We can talk about, we don't need to go down the roads of like systems of oppression harm everyone who who's in them at different levels. But yeah, I mean, I see that it's so interesting to me to hear you zero in over and over again from different perspectives on community and interconnectedness,
Hmm.
and how important all of that is. Like even just now, like hearing you talk about like that our achievements are it's more than just us, right? For people to talk about like their own personal salvation, it's like that's not what we're doing here,
Right.
right?
Like if we're supposed to be Christ-like, that's kind of what we're, if you're a Christian, you're doing. I mean, and that also was true for the Prophet Muhammad. It's kind of like even with his message. I think it's
Yeah.
true in Judaism.
Yeah.
Like yeah, you have a soul, um, in that sense, and you have a soul for which you are responsible. Like there's no original sin in Islam as a distinction from Christianity.
Hmm.
Um, so that's why you don't need a Messiah because it's like, well, you ain't got. It's
Yeah.
not going to take away your sins.
Yeah.
Um, but the nature of your sins, as we could talk about sin, comes from your relationship to the divine first up foremost,
Yeah.
and then relation to your neighbor or your brother or sister.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. And that that in many ways,
excuse
like
me.
sin, bless you, sin is just like the fracture of those
Right.
things. Yeah. I I know us both. I know we could go on for another hour. I really want to respect your time, and I'm so grateful for the time that you've spent with me so far.
Yeah. Thank you for
Um,
having me. I think it was a great conversation.
Absolutely.
I
I'm
hope
gonna
so.
I think so. I'm gonna share all of the ways that people can get in touch with you, if they are looking for a reading or some guidance or to study. I highly, highly recommend Sam as a teacher. Is there anything else, any final thoughts that you want to share before we close?
Um, I think no. I think you drew out. You saw the thread fairly well. This is why I talk about being a humanist. For first and foremost, if I had to, say a name, I'm probably more of a religious humanist in the sense that I have a kinship to the spiritual traditions,
Mm,
including astrology. But it's with the focus on humanity because I'm rooting for us. I think there are a lot of people who can root for the gods, but I think the gods can root for themselves. But I don't think
they don't need us.
they don't need us. I think we can, but we have to be our best advocates. And I
Yeah.
think, you know, a lot of people have lost faith in humanity in recent, times. And I think that's sad because I don't think we've ever been this humane.
Yeah.
You're like, oh my God, are you missing what's happening in Gaza? Are you missing what's happening in Ukraine? Are you missing what's happening in Sudan,
Hmm.
Uganda, all these different
Yeah.
places?
Myanmar,
Are,
all of the places, of course.
I mean, are you missing that? No, I'm not. But here's the thing that's different from every epic that we could talk about. We know, and we are often trying to do something. Send food, flotillas, all
Yeah.
these different things have worldwide marches
Yeah.
related to that, or where people are talking about it, flying flags for Ukraine or whoever.
Yeah.
That's not been our history. And when I say
Mm.
that's not been our history, right, all you have to do is a cursory study of history, or even cursory study of names. And when I say names, like Bharat, for the actual name
Yeah.
for India. Oh yeah, you know that because Bharat means the people, right?
Yeah.
It means them because they saw themselves as the people. They weren't sure what you were,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about it. I mean, like, what's funny about Western Civ, quote unquote, or Europeans kind of saying the foundation for our civilization is Greece, the Greeks would be like, wait, what? What?
We did
You mother,
what? What did we
you,
do?
you motherfuckers, barbar. That's literally where barbarian comes from.
Right.
Like you're idiots. They would have never agreed to that because they saw you themselves as superior to you.
Yeah.
No, we're like, well, we still have that. Yes, we do, but we have a moment now where we at least try to argue for something, where we try to argue for something as something called human and humane. Whether we're talking about the UN
Yeah.
and the idea of other things that, from the 20th century into the 21st is still unprecedented.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think there's progress. And I hope people come to see that it takes all of us. And that's why it's important for people to know their mission. One thing I do want to say, and I'll shut up. One of the reasons why I got deeper into astrology after being in African American studies is I had a realization is that, because specifically I was interested still, in terms of helping my people. I mean, it's become much broader than that, obviously, but helping my people. And one of the things I realized that we were studying our history, we were reclaiming our past collectively, but we weren't dealing with our stories personally. Imani, who was once Jane, traded in her slave name to become
Right.
Imani Sekhmet, but she still was Imani trying to run away from her daddy when daddy was trying to be her man.
Right.
And astrology became a way of opening up that narrative so that people can have more of a therapeutic moment. I was not trying to be, and I'm still not trying to be a therapist, but it becomes a way of becoming reflective on your life at any period of your life to
Yeah.
better understand your trajectory.
Yeah.
And that is critical and part of becoming human. Yeah. Maybe if I write a book, if I write another book, it would become, say, be something like The Art of Becoming Human,
I think so.
rather
Yeah.
than this, the mystical, the mysterious in that way, the divine, because that's what I really am trying to understand deeper recesses of.
Yeah.
So that's it.
Sam, thank you so much. What a
Thank
gift.
you.
Yeah,
Thank you,
what a
Vera.
gift.